Hello and welcome. October is World Mental Health Awareness Month, and so I thought it was fitting to explore mental health at work this month. And I'm delighted to be joined today by Petra Velzeboer. Petra, welcome. How are you?
Good. Thank you so much for having me.
It's a pleasure. Petra, you are a mental health consultant. You run your own business, supporting organizations in terms of putting good mental health practices and policies in place. You're also a qualified psychotherapist and you're also a qualified coach. And you've also just had this book out, which I would recommend, Begin With You, which is all about, it also talks about your own personal journey, which I won't say anything else more about because you need to buy the book. But it then goes on to explore how it's important that we really understand who we are and how we show up at work. But I think also interestingly, from the perspective of today, what as leaders we can do in terms of supporting people in terms of good mental health. So really well positioned for our conversation today. So thank you for joining me. I've got a few questions for you, if I may. And the first one is, in your experience working with organisations, what do you see as the key challenges around mental health in the workplace today?
I mean, a big question. I think the world of work is changing very quickly. So, of course, we all experienced the pandemic. We're all in some version of hybrid working now, right? Whether companies are saying you must come back these days in the week or whatever that looks like for us, that bit of the world is changing. But leadership and working practices haven't really evolved as quickly as we need them to. What we're seeing is meeting culture. Everything's a meeting, right? And so people are working many more hours than they're contracted for simply because they don't have enough hours in the day to do their work. And I've seen, in the work that I do, 4 people being on a meeting which could have been decided by email, or one person could have been on the meeting. You know what I mean? So there's loads of inefficiencies when it comes to working practices. And yet people are stressed. The big buzzword is burnout, of course. And I see burnout not just as a workplace phenomenon, which is what the World Health Organization describes it as, but really about collective trauma and the experience that we've had over a number of years, not fully being processed and being part now of this working kind of a work-life stress that many people are experiencing. And then there's the leadership piece. I think leaders are just as burnt out as everyone else. And often we've got that squeezed middle, right? That are just kind of perpetuating toxic work practices without really taking the time to talk about how we work, not just what we do. So you get on these meetings and it's like agenda items, boom, we think we're being efficient, but actually we're losing the opportunities to build trust and to actually think about, what works for you? How do we evolve our working practices for the future? To name a few. And of course, we've got depression, anxiety, things like that are bubbling up all over the place too.
Brilliant, thank you. And when you work with organisations and you recognise the complexity of what you've just described, where do you start? What is the advice that you were offering leaders, but also that kind of middle layer that you talk around how to best support people at work?
So ideally, we help the well-being leads, HR leads, and senior execs think about where they're headed in the first place. So many mental health approaches are about benefits and what do we do when things go wrong. So you're stressed, call this number, access this benefit, whatever. We're not really doing our blue sky thinking, like strategic thinking about what does good look like, right? So we're running away and firefighting the toxic elements and people struggling, but we're not thinking, where are we trying to get to? How do we know that we're a mentally healthy business? So we kind of take them on a journey to explore that piece. And then ideally, companies who want to get it right, we work with them on their well-being strategy. So what are the elements that we need so that over those years, just like a business strategy takes many years to build towards, we want to use that same kind of thinking when it comes to well-being, people, and that strategy. And then intrinsically link the organizational objectives to the well-being objectives, right? It's because they're one and the same. And then it's the leadership piece. Now, a mentally healthy organization has individual responsibility, which I talk about in the book, and it has organizational responsibility. So many times we see that it's skewed, though. Either middle manager leaders are saying, oh, these snowflakes, Why aren't they accessing the benefits? We have given them things on a silver platter, and yet they're not using them. It's their fault, right? And then equally, the individuals are like, when do I even have time to attend this webinar or go to this thing or access these benefits? Because I'm in meetings all day and then working late into the evening, and then I just want to be with my family. And when we're in survival mode, we get this polarization. We get this kind of us versus them. Everyone's fighting each other. We try and kind of find our tribes and then see who the common enemy is. And so this, of course, is making many workplaces much more toxic than they need to be. And so for me, if we just to keep it short, leading by example. So rather than just saying you do this, it's saying, hey, these are the things I do to invest in myself and my well-being. What do you do? So enabling those conversations that challenge personal responsibility, but then really listening to our people as well, as far as, well, are these benefits even fit for purpose? What is it actually the systems of how we work that would make the biggest impact, or adding more resource to the workforce or whatever it might be, than just kind of throwing on a plaster to gaping wounds?
Yeah, and it's interesting because I know in the book you talk about 80-20. You talk about the fact that an organisation should be spending 80% of its time doing that piece of work, looking at how they create those psychologically safe cultures, how they make sure that the mental health objectives align with the business objectives, etc. And 20% should be the piece where you're possibly coping with working with people in crisis, etc. From a perspective of a manager working with an individual, which you alluded to there, the listening skills and creating the psychological safety. Can you tell me a little bit more in terms of bringing that to life? What does that look like in the workplace?
So listening sounds really simple, right? But it's not easy. We live in a world of distraction where the version of listening that often happens is, tell me what's going on for you. What challenges are you experiencing? Great question. Much better than how are you, just which elicits I'm fine. And then it's, our notifications are pinging. Oh, just a minute. Let me take this call. Let me just do this email. 1 second. I'll be right with you. Right. And so we have this disjointed element of listening. And not only does that not build trust, it actually erodes it, because that person is sitting there ready to be vulnerable and open up, and they are not given the attention. And this applies in our personal lives as well, right? Do we listen to our kids? Do we listen to our partners or friends, right? To nurture and boost our well-being. And so the first practice in a world of addiction, let's be real, is to practice presence, right? And so can we sit with somebody else's emotional space? So the next skill is not feeling that you have to fix things or tell them what to do, right? So that's when we're in manager mode, often our job is to fix things, right? We wear that hat and it's to fix things and tell people what to do. So really it's nurturing coaching skills, I guess, which enable us to go, hey, when you were feeling better, what things were different in your life, right? So now we're empowering personal solutions. And then we might say, how can I help? But again, it's that person being able to say, well, I think I need a little bit of space to do this thing, or can I have some flex on a deadline, or whatever it might be. So listening truly, not needing to fix, and then empowering personal solutions. And ideally, that manager is getting that same treatment from above. And that's where the tricky thing is in a culture.
And what do you think prevents that happening in a lot of workplace cultures today?
Well, the thing someone would say to me is time. I don't have time. That's basically, I'm busy, I don't have time. Those are the classic reasons and excuses these days. But we don't realize the return on investment of those little bits of time ahead of time, right? In a prevention kind of culture perspective, how much time we save on recruiting new talent, on supporting someone who is now burnt out or absent from work, on the management that we need for someone who's underperforming, right? So you either spend the small bits of time up front, or you're going to spend a lot more time repairing those elements. So even, when we go to the gym, we end up sleeping better, or we end up focusing more. So it's kind of counterintuitive because we think we don't have time for these things, but we end up paying for it later.
Yeah, fascinating. And finally, I guess, what would you say would be your final reflections that is important for us to consider in terms of supporting good mental health at work?
I think the biggest one is actually a feeling of belonging and connection. So in a world of isolation, loneliness, it's still a taboo topic to really talk about that, right? People are looking for meaningful connections, but we have lost some of the ability or the skill to get us what we need, right? So you might vaguely know, like, oh, I feel really alone. I don't have a sense of community, but you might not know, where can I start? What can I do? So no matter what level you are in a business, you all have everyone has a personal life as well, right? And so when we come into offices, so say you're mandated to come in 2 to 3 days, so many times you're there by yourself or you're on Teams meetings all day anyway, right? That's not fostering connection and belonging. And so I think a good well-being strategy, a great team leader, but anyone can take responsibility for this. How do we create meaningful connection at work? So if you're coming in on a Thursday, are you having lunch together? Are you having an in-person meeting and spending some of it getting to know each other as humans, not just going into tasks? So there's a million ways that we can do this, and it takes practicing bravery, no matter what level you're at, to go first, to ask the difficult question, to move into a different way of relating. I think that's the biggest, most profound impact we can have on a culture.
Fantastic. I must just ask you about that bit about bravery, because in the book you also talk about the fact that there's still stigma around mental health. And I think to some degree, quite often as individuals, we almost have a little bit of a fear of kind of opening something we don't quite know what to do with. And you spoke about the fact that it's listening, not fixing. What is behind that? And what can we do about it?
I mean, it's also just normalizing. It's also just normalizing human emotions. And so in my team, we also ask about good mental health. So we ask things like, what's one thing that's going well in your life? Positive psychology. We've connected, but we've lifted ourselves up in a certain way. We ask each other, what's one thing you're grateful for? We then say things like, what's the biggest challenge you're facing at the moment? So we're not immediately going, how are you? Are you depressed? And assuming that something horrible is going on. But we normalize these conversations in our normal working day, so that when someone is struggling, the trust is there. They'll say, oh, I'm really anxious today. And the trick for a manager is not to immediately send them home or take all their work off them, right? These are the fears about, if we ask this, nobody's going to be doing their work. So my head of strategy, she knows that I talk about her all the time. She deals with anxiety, right? And so she'll quite openly say, I'm feeling anxious today. And I don't say, ooh, should I take everything off of you? I go, what do you need to be your best self today? And she goes, well, to be honest, just saying it helped. And probably after this stressful thing, I'm going to hit the gym or go for a walk. Cool. Personal responsibility. So do you see how that narrative is totally different? And yes, 80-20 rule, we want the stories of poor mental health. We want the normalizing, and leaders to be open about those things too. But it takes bravery to say what's going well in your life too, in a world where the news is just saying everything's terrible and you don't have a right to feel okay.
I love that. I love the kind of changing the perspective on it into a more of a positive psychology approach in terms of how you explore it. And there's some fantastic tips there in terms of what to start thinking about in terms of encouraging a positive mental health workplace, I think. So Petra, thank you very much for your time today. It's been a pleasure spending time with you, and I would really recommend begin with you.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you all. If there's anything in the blog that has come up, in the video log that's come up today that is of interest, please get in touch, and there'll also be Petra's contact details as well under the video. So thanks very much for your time. Bye-bye.